The door didn't open. Elena stood on the 14th floor of the building she had owned for 11 years, key in hand, and the door didn't open. She checked the number. 14B, her number. Her name used to be on the letterbox downstairs. It wasn't anymore, but she'd noticed that and assumed the building manager had finally updated the directory she'd been asking him to fix for months. She knocked. The woman who answered was perhaps 35, wearing an apron and holding a baby on her hip. Behind her, Elena could see boxes half unpacked in a living room she recognized. Her living room. Her view. "Can I help you?" the woman said, and her tone was perfectly pleasant because she had no idea why a stranger was standing at her door. Elena opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Because in that moment, with her suitcase at her feet and 4 weeks of vacation sand still in the lining of her shoes, Elena understood something that would take her the next 2 years to fully process. Her family had sold her home while she was away, and they had not told her. This is the story of how it happened, and how Elena decided, very quietly and very finally, never to look back. You need to understand what that apartment meant to Elena before you can understand what was taken from her. Elena Koch was 45 years old when this story begins. She was the younger of 2 children, younger by 3 years and by approximately 15 years of parental expectation. Her brother Sirhan was the heir apparent of the family's hopes, the son who would carry the name, the son who would be supported through university, the son for whom their father had taken a second job in the years when money was tight. Elena was the daughter. She was told, not unkindly, that she would find a husband. The assumption was delivered the way weather forecasts are delivered, not as a preference, but as a statement of the natural order of things. Elena did not find a husband. Or rather, she found several and found them wanting, which she considered entirely her right. What she found instead, slowly and through enormous effort, was a career. She started as a junior graphic designer at an advertising agency in Istanbul at 23, earning what she described as barely enough for rent and 1 meal a day that wasn't instant noodles. By 30, she was running her own small studio. By 38, that studio had 8 employees and a client list that included 2 of the largest retail chains in Turkey. She was, by any measure, a success. But success had not made her family's assumptions quieter. They simply shifted. Now, instead of "you'll find a husband," it became, "when are you going to settle down?" And "your career is impressive, but isn't it lonely?" And "Sirhan's wife is pregnant again. When will we have grandchildren from you?" Elena had learned, by 40, to smile at these questions the way she smiled at difficult clients, warmly, professionally, and with absolutely no intention of changing course. The penthouse at 14B was purchased in 2018 when Elena was 42 years old. She had saved for 9 years. She had declined vacations, driven a car that embarrassed her clients, eaten lunch at her desk for 3 years straight. She had done what no one in her family had thought to do for her. She had built something entirely her own. The apartment had 3 bedrooms and a terrace that wrapped around the south and west faces of the building, with a view of the Bosphorus that made guests go quiet the first time they saw it. Elena had spent 6 months furnishing it carefully. Not expensively, but with intention. Every object in that apartment had been chosen. She threw 1 housewarming party. Her parents came. Sirhan came with his wife and their 2 children. Her mother walked through every room saying Mashallah, and then said, at dinner, that it was a shame Elena didn't have a husband to share it with. Her father said the mortgage must be enormous, which it was, and Elena said yes, and did not explain that she had paid it in cash. She hadn't wanted the conversation that would follow. The questions about where the money came from. The assumption that someone must have helped her. No one had helped her. That was the entire point. For 3 years, the penthouse was exactly what Elena had needed it to be. Proof, not to anyone else. She had long since stopped requiring her family's approval, but to herself. Proof that the path she had chosen, the one no one had mapped for her, had been worth choosing. Then her mother called and suggested the family take a group vacation together. 4 weeks, a summer rental on the Aegean coast. It's been so long since we were all together, her mother said. And Elena, who genuinely loved her mother, even if she did not always recognize herself in her, said yes. She packed. She arranged for a neighbor to water her plants. She gave her father, purely for emergency building administration purposes, a document the building manager had suggested. A limited power of attorney. She should have read the fine print more carefully. But she trusted her father. He was her father. The building manager's name was Hissien Bey, and he had worked in that building for 12 years. He knew Elena. He knew her parking spot and her preferred delivery instructions and the name of the plant she'd once asked him to help her bring upstairs because it was too heavy. He could not look her in the eye when she came downstairs from the door that no longer opened. He pulled the file without her asking. He placed it on the counter between them and stepped back, as if the paper itself might explain what he could not bring himself to say. The sale had gone through 3 weeks earlier. The buyer was a couple relocating from Ankara. The selling agent, a firm Elena did not recognize, had processed the transaction through a legal firm in Shishli. The seller of record, authorized by power of attorney, was her father, Ahmet Koç. Her father. Elena stood at that counter for what Hizayin Bey would later describe as a very long time. She thanked him. She walked outside. She sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the building's entrance garden, with her suitcase beside her and her carry-on in her lap, and she called her father. Her father answered on the third ring. The conversation was short, not because Elena kept it short. She intended to ask questions, many questions, starting with how and when and ending, inevitably, with "Why did you not tell me?" But because her father's first sentence made all the other questions briefly irrelevant. "We didn't think you'd understand if we explained it beforehand," he said. "It was the only way to help your brother." He had not said, "I'm sorry." He had not said, "I know this is a shock." He had not said, "We should have asked." He had explained. As if the explanation, delivered with enough calm, would close the matter. Sirhan's debt, and here the word debt must be understood in its most serious possible sense, had accumulated over 2 years. It was not a gambling habit in the way that a weakness for lottery tickets is a habit. Sirhan had, without anyone in the family knowing until the situation became impossible to conceal, been a regular at illegal underground card games in Istanbul's outer districts and had borrowed money from people who were not banks and who did not use the legal system to collect. The number was 800,000 lira. In the currency's current state, the equivalent of roughly 40,000 euros. Sirhan's apartment, mortgaged, co-owned with his wife, legally complicated, could not be sold quickly enough. His salary would take 15 years to cover the debt, assuming no interest, which there would be. Her father had received the phone call from Sirhan on a Thursday evening. The men Sirhan owed money to had given the family 2 weeks. Ahmet Koç, who was a practical man and who had, in his way, always prioritized his son, had looked at the assets available to him and made a decision. He had access to Elena's apartment through the power of attorney. Elena's apartment would cover the debt and leave some remainder. Elena was on vacation, he had told himself, and Elena believed this, which made it worse rather than better. That he would find a way to explain it. That perhaps, when it was done, when Sirhan was safe and the matter was settled, the family would sit down and discuss compensation. A repayment plan. He had told himself these things. And then he had signed the papers. Elena sat on that stone wall outside her former home and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that her father had not asked her permission because he had not believed she would give it. And he had not believed she would give it because, on some level, he had never fully accepted that the apartment was entirely hers to refuse. The family meeting was her mother's idea. "We should talk this through together," Fatma Hanım had said, on the phone, with the gentle authority she deployed when she wanted to believe that love could smooth over structural failures. Elena came. She did not know whether this was strength or habit. She came because she still believed, in some part of herself she had not yet surrendered, that the people in that room were capable of understanding what they had done. She would leave the meeting with a different understanding. Sirhan spoke first, which surprised no one. "I know this is hard," he said. "And I know you're angry, but I want you to understand. I had no choice. These people were dangerous. This wasn't just money, Elena. This was the family's safety." He paused. And then he said the thing that Elena would think about for years afterward, the sentence that revealed the precise shape of his understanding of their family and of her place in it. "You live alone anyway," he said. "The apartment was just sitting there. I have a wife. I have kids. I have actual responsibilities. Just sitting there. As if the 11 years of work that had purchased it were incidental. As if her home's value was measured by the number of people sleeping in it." Elena looked at him for a long moment. She did not shout. She had prepared herself, on the drive over, for the possibility that she would shout, and had decided against it. Not out of restraint exactly, but because she had realized that Sirhan was not the person she needed to hear from. She turned to her mother. Her mother's response was the one Elena had most feared, because it was the one she had most expected, and because it came wrapped in genuine love, which made it impossible to simply dismiss. "You know, I think what happened was wrong," Fatma said quietly. "I told your father he should have asked you. But Elena, your brother had a family in danger. You have to understand his position too. He was desperate. He wasn't thinking clearly." Then she said it. The sentence Elena had heard in various forms her entire life, but never quite so plainly, never quite so nakedly attached to a transaction. A son has responsibilities to his family. He was trying to protect his children. You're independent. You always have been. You can start over. You're strong enough. Strong enough. Her mother meant it as a compliment. This was the worst part. Her independence, her capability, her life built entirely on her own terms. These were not being celebrated. They were being used as justification. The fact that she needed no one made her the obvious candidate for sacrifice. Her father said very little. Ahmet Koç was a man who processed guilt through silence, and he sat at the head of his own table and looked at the space between his hands and offered once a version of, "I thought it was the only way. I thought we would work something out afterward." There was no plan for afterward. Elena asked directly, "What is the plan to repay me?" The silence that followed was its own answer. Sirhan's wife studied her nails. Sirhan shifted in his chair and said something about once things stabilize. Fatma said there was no need to make it transactional between family. Ahmet looked at his hands. Elena understood, in that room, that she was not going to receive an apology that carried any weight. She was not going to receive a repayment plan. What she was going to receive was the family's expectation that love, or at least the obligation that traveled under love's name, would eventually smooth this over. She picked up her bag. She thanked her mother for the tea, which she had not drunk. She kissed her father on the cheek, because she was not yet done being kind, even when kindness was undeserved. She walked past Sirhan without a word. She drove home, to the rented room near her studio that she had moved into after the penthouse was sold. And she sat at the small window that looked onto a parking garage, and she allowed herself, for exactly one evening, to grieve. Then she opened her laptop and started making a different kind of plan. Elena's lawyer was a woman named Pelin, who had handled Elena's business contracts for 7 years and who, upon being told what had happened, said, "Tell me everything," and then sat quietly and listened without interrupting, which Elena considered one of the finest things a person can do. The news from Pelin was partial, but not without possibility. The power of attorney Elena had signed was broad enough that a skilled real estate lawyer might have challenged its scope regarding property sales. But might, in this context, meant a lengthy legal process with uncertain outcomes, significant costs, and the near certainty of a family rupture so complete that there would be no return. Elena asked Pelin to give her a week. During that week, she did 3 things. First, she called a friend who worked in financial investigations and asked, very casually, whether Sirhan's debt story could be verified. Her friend, who owed Elena a favor and understood discretion, made some inquiries. What he found was interesting. The debt was real. But the amount that had been paid to the creditors was approximately 600,000 lira. The remaining 200,000 was unaccounted for in Sirhan's paperwork. She filed this information carefully. Second, she had a conversation with a notary about inheritance law. The Koç family had modest assets, her parents' apartment, a small plot of land outside the city that had been in the family for decades, some savings. As their daughter, Elena was a legal heir to a portion of these assets. She instructed the notary to prepare a document formally renouncing her inheritance rights from both parents. She did not file it immediately. Third, she made a decision about the legal case. She would not pursue it, not because she couldn't. Pelin believed there was a case, but because she understood something that a court proceeding could not deliver. She did not want to win in a way that required spending the next 2 years inside the family's story. She wanted to leave their story. Entirely. Permanently. Elena understood is what you pursue when you still need something from the people who hurt you. She needed nothing from them anymore. What she needed was distance, and the discipline to stop waiting for an apology that was never coming. She redirected the energy she might have spent on litigation into a business decision she had been deferring for 2 years. Expanding her studio's Istanbul operation and opening a second office in a city where she had always wanted to live. She signed the lease on a new studio in 3 weeks. She moved 4 months later. The years that followed moved the way years do when you are no longer watching them through someone else's expectations. Elena's studio grew. She hired 6 new staff in the first year of the new location, and within 3 years had clients she had previously considered unreachable. She found an apartment she loved. Smaller than the penthouse, with a different view and eventually more deeply her own, because she had chosen it entirely freely and without grief. She saw her parents twice in the first 2 years. Both times were difficult. Her mother cried at the first meeting. Her father was quieter than she remembered. Sirhan was not present at either occasion, which was, Elena felt, the correct outcome of his own choices rather than anyone's deliberate exclusion. In the 4th year, Sirhan's wife left him. The reasons were multiple and personal and not entirely related to the gambling, though they were not entirely unrelated either. He lost his position at the company he'd worked at for a decade. He called Elena once, from a different number she didn't recognize, and left a message that said he was going through a difficult time and wanted to talk. Elena listened to the message twice. She did not return the call. In the 6th year, her father developed a health condition that required regular care. Her mother, who was not young, called Elena to discuss the situation. Elena listened. She arranged for a home care service. She researched 3 providers and paid for the first month herself, quietly and without announcement. But she did not move back. She did not take on the role that daughters are assigned by default in families that have not thought carefully about what they are assigning. She helped because she chose to. Not because she owed it, not because it was expected, but because she had decided, on her own terms, what kind of person she wanted to be. And it was not the kind who abandons aging parents, even imperfect ones. It was also not the kind who sacrifices herself to restore a family's comfort with its own bad decisions. On the evening of her 51st birthday, Elena sat on the small balcony of her apartment in the new city with a glass of wine and a book she had been meaning to read for 3 years and watched the lights come on across the water. She thought about the penthouse. She thought about it the way you think about a place you love that no longer exists, with a specific kind of loss that is real but not disabling. She had not replaced it. She had not tried to. She had built something different instead. She picked up the book. Her phone was inside, silent, on the kitchen counter. Her brother's number was still in her contacts. She had not deleted it. She had not called it either. There are some doors, Elena had learned, that you keep in the world but stop walking toward. Not from bitterness. Not from punishment. From the quiet, final, unilateral decision to protect your own life. If Elena's story stayed with you, if you recognize something in the way families sometimes use love as a justification for taking, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe to Second Acts, because it's never too late to write your own ending.